name's Penny, and as usual I'm here to talk about some bookish things. Specifically, since I've already read 11 things this month, I thought I would do a mid-month wrap-up, and I'm going to do this in the book battle format that I started doing last month. I'll leave that initial video down below if you want to watch that. But basically I've used a website to set me up a tournament bracket of all these books, and each pair will battle it out until we come up with an ultimate champion, and then whichever book is the champion of this mid-month wrap-up will go up against the champion of the second half of the month. So we're going to have 2 initial rounds and then the semi-finals and then the finals. And while you're watching this book battle, I do challenge you to see how early you can figure out who the winner's going to be. So let's get into round 1. And the first book battle is going to be between The Wicked and the Divine by Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey, and Uzumaki by Junji Ito. So both of these are graphic novel type works. We'll start with Uzumaki. This is like a horror manga where spirals infect this town and it gets more and more extreme as the book goes on. It's quite intense, quite gross in parts. So I definitely don't think it will be for everyone, but personally it was just so strange that I absolutely loved it. The art isn't always the best, although there are some parts that I thought were drawn very well, especially the really gross parts. Then for The Wicked and the Divine, I actually read this on my iPad, which I don't think is the ideal way to read graphic novels, although it is okay. This graphic novel is about these teenagers who have become gods or realize that they're gods. I'm not sure which way around it goes. Unfortunately, once they gain their godhood, they then only have a few years to live. During this time, they are treated as pop stars and worshipped, but you know, there's a downside when you know you're gonna die. However, our main character is not a god. She is a god fangirl going to all their concerts, and then when one of the gods gets in trouble, she tries to help them out. I will say that I really love the art style of this graphic novel series, but I don't feel like I got enough of the story from the first volume to really know yet whether I'm going to like the story or not. I think there's a lot of potential, but I think I'll have to wait until I've read more volumes to decide whether it really delivers on that potential. So for this book battle between Uzumaki and The Wicked and the Divine Volume 1, at this point I think I would have to go with Uzumaki. Perhaps once I get a little bit further in the Wicked and the Divine series, I might change my mind about that. The next 2 books we have battling against each other are The City Born Great by N.K. Jemisin and Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. The City Born Great is a prequel short story to N.K. Jemisin's new release, The City We Became, so I kind of wanted to read this short story before I try and get my hands on that novel. But reading this short story has made me much more excited to get my hands on the full novel. I just think there's going to be so many cool ideas for her to explore. This is the story of New York City kind of merging with this person in order to gain its soul or to be born into a great city. Obviously this was a very short story, so there wasn't much chance to explore what that really meant, but I do think N.K. Jemisin did a really good job with making the character seem very real and well developed in such a short space, and also creating such a new and interesting world, even though it's our own world, but it just gives you such a different perspective of our own world. Then Catching Fire is the sequel to The Hunger Games. I've been doing an audiobook re-listen of that series in preparation for the new book coming out later in the year. So I guess both of the books in this battle were like preparation reading, homework if you want to think of it that way. And I really liked Catching Fire. I don't think that it's quite as good as The Hunger Games, but it definitely still had an emotional impact on me. If you haven't read The Hunger Games, then I can't really tell you about Catching Fire without it being spoilers, but like The Hunger Games, there is a bunch of people being put in a situation where they're expected to fight to the death, and at the same time they're sort of starting a bit of a revolution against the capital who treats its people as slaves. I think it's difficult to put these 2 stories against each other because they were so different, but I think I would have to go with Catching Fire just because there was so much more to it that I got a lot more emotionally engaged. There was a part where they're being interviewed and I nearly cried. Next we have 2 books that I actually have the physical copy for both of them. So firstly, we have The Calculating Stars and Her Fearful Symmetry by Audrey Niffenegger. This is an alternate history where a meteor hits Washington DC in the 50s, and that leads America to really push forward their space program. And we follow this woman who was a pilot in the war, and she does like maths calculations for the space program, and she's really pushing for women to be involved in the space program as astronauts. It has really strong themes of dealing with anxiety as well as obviously feminism, but I think as well it does a lot to really honestly approach white privilege within that feminist conversation. And I think the main character is a really good example of how you can really fight for your feminist rights while still recognizing that you do have some level of privilege. And overall it was just well paced. I enjoyed my reading experience while reading this. Then we have the other book that's up against, and that is Her Fearful Symmetry by Audrey Niffenegger. So I picked this up because Audrey Niffenegger is the author of The Time Traveler's Wife, which I really loved. This was very different. So in this book we have two women who are twins. One of them lives in the UK and one of them lives in America. The one in America has two more twins as her daughters. Then the one in the UK actually dies, and she leaves her apartment to the twins of the other woman, even though they haven't talked in many years. And it's a bit of a family secret why they've been estranged from each other. So a lot of this story is about twins and their relationships with each other. For these two younger twins, one of them doesn't have the best of health, but the other one really likes to take care of her and never wants to be separate from them. And the one that is always being looked after kind of wants a bit more of her own freedom. So they've got a strange relationship going on. There's also the ex-partner of the auntie who is living in the same apartment building and kind of dealing with the fact that these guys look a lot like his now dead girlfriend. And at the same time there's this weird story with this guy with OCD and his wife leaving him and him trying to get himself well in order to get her back. Now in the end, that story with the OCD man was the bit of the story I enjoyed the most, but I would really like to find a review of someone who has OCD to know whether that representation was very good. I have read that it is based on Audrey Niffenegger's own ex-partner who had OCD, but that doesn't necessarily make me more confident since it's her ex-partner. Maybe she wasn't feeling very charitable. But regardless, that part of the story definitely is the part that made me feel the most. Some of the stuff that happens in the rest of the story, I thought it was really interesting. It was just ruined a little bit by the fact that it didn't really make any sense. And also, I was really put off by the fact that these young girls who are 21, but all the descriptions say that they seem much younger than that. And then they keep having these romantic and sexual type relationships with these middle-aged men. And it just, it's kind of gross, and also didn't really add anything to the story. Like, I think the story would have been a lot better without that. So this one, I don't even know what star rating I'm going to give it at the moment, because like in some ways it was really interesting, in some ways it got me emotionally invested, but in other ways I just don't understand some of the decisions that were made in the writing of this book. So in this case, I think it's probably pretty clear which one of these would win. I'm going to put The Calculating Stars through to the next round. Okay, so on to round 2. The first battle that we're going to have in this round is between The Kingdom by Jess Rothenberg and again Uzumaki by Junji Ito. So I already talked about Uzumaki. The Kingdom is set in a futuristic Disney where their princess actors have been replaced by these hybrid humans. They're kind of androids. But then there's been a couple of occurrences where these princesses have escaped the theme park and gone out into the real world, and it hasn't gone very well. The story is told through 2 timelines, so we're following one of the princesses, Anna, as she kind of is learning about some strange things going on within the park, and also a future where she is part of this court case trying to decide whether they should convict her of murder. Now Anna, her best friend princess is Nia, who is actually Pania of the Reef, who is actually from Maori mythology. So I was really excited to see a little bit of my own country's mythology within this story. I mean, for the most part, the whole Pania and the Reef thing didn't play into the story at all, other than the fact that she was some kind of mermaid type princess. And Nia goes kind of crazy off script, does some really terrible things, and so during the earlier time frame, Anna's trying to work out why that happened to her favorite sister. As I said in my vlog, I do think I hurt my enjoyment of this a little bit by coming up with my own very far out ideas of what might have happened, but I do overall still think this is a really good story. I didn't see everything coming, and I also think that not everything was wrapped up in the end, so I'm interested to see whether we will get a sequel for this book at some point. If we do, I will definitely be reading it because I did find the concepts really interesting and I'd love to see them explored further. I also just think Anna, the main character, the hybrid human princess, was a really interesting character. And there is a romance within the story, and it would almost be interesting to see that romance taken further, given the fact that she's not really human. So in a battle between these two books, it's again pretty close. I read a lot of really good books so far in April, but I think when it comes down to it, my favorite of these two was Uzumaki by Junji Ito. The next book battle is between two books that I listened to on audiobook. First we have Magic Bites by Alona Andrews, the first book in the Kate Daniels series, and then also The Bone Witch by Rin Chipeko. So Magic Bites, as I said, the first book in the Kate Daniels series, which is one of my most favorite series ever, so obviously I liked it. Kate Daniels is a mercenary in this post-apocalyptic Atlanta in a world where magic has started to come back, but it's started to come back in waves. So sometimes magic works, sometimes technology works, and you can never really predict which one's going to be working at any time. There's also a lot of different mythical creatures coming back, and the magic is really based on what people believe in. So there's a lot of different mythologies built into this world, which I really enjoy. Kate Daniels is kind of an expert in mythology, so that helps her when she's fighting against all these different magical creatures. And at the beginning of the series, her old guardian is killed, and she gets involved in the murder investigation, trying to work out what happened to him. She also gets involved with the local shapeshifter gang. She has some trouble with the local necromancers. I just really love the way that Alona Andrews, which is actually a husband and wife team, I love the way that they have adapted quite common mythological creatures into a very realistic interpretation of those concepts. And at the same time, Kate Daniels is just really snarky and funny and badass, but at the same time really flawed. So she's a very believable and relatable character. So obviously I liked that one. Then we come to The Bone Witch. Now I've heard some people say that they really love this, and I really went into it hoping that I would love it too. We're following this girl who learns that she has necromancy type powers. And that really sounds like something that I would really like, but unfortunately for me it just came across as a little bit young. And I mean, I guess that's fine if you're reading it when you're young, but I was expecting something a bit darker. I also just thought a lot of it is just her kind of going to this place and being trained as a necromancer. Obviously, a lot of people are afraid of her as a necromancer, and she kind of has to deal with that prejudice against her. But most of the time, I just felt like what was happening wasn't very interesting. Right at the beginning, she brings her brother back from the dead. That was cool. Right at the end, an interesting thing did happen. But for most of the book, I just couldn't bring myself to care about what was happening. And there were a lot of characters introduced throughout the book, and given that I didn't care about any of them, it just felt like a lot of work to keep track of them all. I don't know. I really wanted to like The Bone Witch, so for those of you who like The Bone Witch, can you please tell me why I should continue the series? Because I want to. I want to like it. Tell me what I'm missing. Anyway, I think this makes it quite obvious that when we put these two books up to battle against each other, obviously I'm going to put Magic Bites through to the next round. The next two books that we have up against each other is The Tales of Suspense by Edgar Allan Poe against Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. So again, I already talked about Catching Fire. Let's talk about Tales of Suspense. So this is basically an anthology of short stories. I didn't actually read this. I listened to the audiobook. In fact, I listened to a different Edgar Allan Poe audiobook short story collection, and I just listened to the short stories from this anthology, even though the audiobook I was listening to had way more stories. But I wasn't quite willing to commit to listening to the whole collection of Edgar Allan Poe because he has written a lot of stuff. And I struggle a little bit with Edgar Allan Poe. The reason why I decided to pick it up on audiobook is just because the writing style is very wordy and I do struggle to get through it a little bit, so audiobook makes that a little bit easier. There are things that I really like about Poe. I really love it when he's being just like so emo and dark. Some of the ways that he words some of these things are just so beautiful but dark. A lot of people in his books tend to murder people very easily, which seems suspicious. Like, how many people did Edgar Allan Poe murder? That's what I want to know. I do also really like the short stories that are set up as mysteries, where you're kind of given like an impossible situation, and then as a character is explaining to you how they solve the mystery, you're trying to work out the mystery alongside them. But as I said, it can be very wordy. There are some stories which just seem to be a lot of talking for not really much point, so those ones I didn't enjoy. But the ones I did enjoy, I really enjoyed. This is always the problem with anthologies. It's hard to find an anthology where you like every single story. Still, for the sake of getting a bit of history under my belt, I'm very glad that I've read this. However, when I put it up against Catching Fire, I still go back to the fact that I felt a lot more emotionally invested in the story of Catching Fire. It's probably not fair to put a normal novel up against a short story anthology. Although I can think of some short story anthologies that might have made it through, so anyway, I'm going to put Catching Fire through to the next round. Then our last pairing of round 2 is Two Hearts by Peter S. Beagle up against The Calculating Stars. So I've talked about this. Two Hearts is a short story that's actually a sequel to The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. After I read the short story, I couldn't stop myself going and watching the movie of The Last Unicorn because it is one of the most beautiful movies ever. If you haven't watched the movie of The Last Unicorn, I do recommend it. If you have watched the movie and you love it, I also recommend the book. It is in some ways quite different from the movie, but at the same time it captures the same feeling, so I really love this. And I feel like the short story also captured that same feeling, even though it's set in the future when the characters from this are much older. And for the most part, we're following this young girl whose town has been terrorized by a griffin, and she's gone off to try and get help from the king, and then ends up getting help from the characters in this book. I love the writing style. I thought the way that it explained it was just so beautiful. It felt like a fairy tale. It had like a nice little sense of humor going on. I definitely enjoyed it. That's why when it comes down to battling this book against that short story, it's very hard to pick a winner because they were just so different but also both so good. Why do I do this to myself? I just had a look at my spreadsheet and I gave them both 3.9. So that doesn't even help to make my decision easier. I'm going to go with The Calculating Stars only because I think it dealt with a lot of real world issues in a really good way. So if that decision was hard, now we're up to the semi-finals where I'm sure that every decision is going to be hard. Although we do only have 2 battles in this round. So firstly, we have Uzumaki up against Magic Bites. This is really hard because I did really love this. But at the same time, the Kate Daniels series is one of my most favorite series ever. So obviously I love that. I think if you like horror mangas, I would totally recommend this. But I'm going to put Magic Bites through to the finals just because I think I'd like a lot more people to read that series. I think that it deals with mythology in such a unique way. The way that magic is like a temporary inconvenience. I just love it. So it's on to the finals. Then we have Catching Fire up against The Calculating Stars. So both science fictions. Even though it's set in the 50s, I do think The Calculating Stars is somewhat more realistic, but both of them definitely deal with real life issues, even if Catching Fire does it in a much more fictional manner. It's so hard to pick a winner because I think both these books are really great. I keep just like sitting here in silence waiting for my brain to figure out a reason why one is better than the other. Okay, I had a look at my spreadsheet. That helped. I do think the themes and ideas in this are really amazing and much more interesting. However, overall I thought the plot and the pacing of Catching Fire was a lot better than The Calculating Stars. So while I would still recommend that people read this because I think it has a lot of important messages as a fictional work, I'm going to put Catching Fire through to the finals. And I mean, I kind of feel like it's a bullshit reason because fictional works should still have good themes and ideas, but Catching Fire does. So just because I think the plot was a bit more exciting, I'm going to go with Catching Fire. Is that the right call? Who knows? So that means for the finals we have 2 audiobooks up against each other. I think this happened in March as well. So I guess that's what happens when I'm doing rereads. I only reread books that I really love, so they make their way through to the finals. So we've got Magic Bites up against Catching Fire. Both of these are like post-apocalyptic, although one is fantasy and the other is science fiction. I do tend to prefer fantasy. Magic Bites is one of my most favourite series ever, but still I do understand why Hunger Games has been so successful, and I do think Catching Fire is really great as well. I also would say that while Magic Bites is a good start to that series, it wasn't until later in that series that I started getting really emotionally invested in the characters, whereas in Catching Fire, because it's a sequel, I'm already emotionally invested, but also I just think the setup really lent itself to making you feel for the different people competing in the games. So, it's a hard one, but I think I'm going to make the champion for the first half of April be Catching Fire. And I'm going to have to spend the second half of the month trying to find a book that will beat that. I do have some good ones that I have on the rest of my TBR, so we'll see what happens. Do let me know whether you managed to guess the winner earlier on. I think it would have been hard because I don't know if I could have guessed. Also, if you have read any of the books that I talked about today, I would love to talk with you about them more down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you're having a really wonderful day, and I will see you next time.